I want to tell you a story from the Old Testament. Reading for today from Jeremiah reminded me about a trip that I took more than 25 years ago. My grandfather was one of my heroes. Imperfect, to be sure, but a hero to me. I've preached about him a time or two before. He was a lifelong cattleman and a farmer. He even worked his cattle from horseback when he needed to. As I've said before, it's pretty neat growing up knowing that your own grandfather was the real Marlboro Man. He had the cowboy hat, the boots, and that grizzled look that came from a lifetime outside. And I never saw him without his cigar. Never lit, but always chomping away. The years took their toll on his body, but I never doubted that even on his deathbed, he could whip me and any other man who was fool enough to try him. He always said with a wry smile that he was too ornery to die. But we all knew that he was a softy, especially when it came to his grandkids. We would regale ourselves on his tough guy stories. But the thing is, they were usually true. By and by, my grandfather retired. He hung up his spurs for the last time. He had come in from the range where he and the only girl he ever loved, our Nana, settled down in a tidy double wide in town where he grew the best peaches and persimmons, which Nana baked into the best cookies and pies. He had a simple way: family, a man's word, hard work every day, quiet faith, and love. It was simple, but it worked. By the time of this story, my grandmother had sadly passed on. But not long after Nana's death, Papo, as we called him, Papo and I hatched a plan. We set out on a grand road trip. It was one last roundup of sorts to visit all of Papo's cousins who were still alive and kicking and still pushing cows. So we started from Dallas and went all across West Texas, through every corner of New Mexico, stopping from ranch to ranch as he called on his cousins. And if you've never spent any time in West Texas or New Mexico, it's a beautiful expanse, as beautiful as it is sparse and spare. We could go for a few hours without seeing another car. We could go for an hour on dirt roads, picking our way by handwritten directions from years ago. And it was at that time, or on that month that we were there, it was hot and it was dry. And, I'm from Virginia, but for me it felt like there were rattlesnakes and scorpions waiting at every rest stop. It was a hardscrabble terrain. It was stark. Day after day we went, and though I was excited to see these long-lost great-uncles and great-grandparents aunts, at their ranches and to listen to the stories of my family. After a while, though, the terrain began to sort of seep into my psyche. As we left one ranch and drove for hours to the next, though I recognized that it was beautiful terrain, I began to realize as well that this was also dangerous terrain. Keep in mind, that was before cell phones. One flat tire in this neighborhood, and we could be in real trouble. My grandfather and his people had grown up in Oklahoma and West Texas and New Mexico. I, on the other hand, I grew up in Virginia. As such, I was well acquainted with heat and humidity. I was not acquainted with the dry that kills everything, that does not have shade or water, and does so quickly. We crossed from Texas into New Mexico, not far from Roswell. It was, as I said, dry, parched. From there, we drove through the Sacramento mountains. We stopped at Ruidoso for lunch, and it was, by that time, high up, but it was still hot and dry. Then our route called for us to make for Alamogordo and Las Cruces, and finally, outside of Deming, we would get to Aunt Louise's ranch, and finally, dinner. But all I wanted that whole way was a cold drink of water. I could hardly wait. But first, Papa wanted us to make a short detour to show me something he said I would not forget, and he was right. We arrived at White Sands National Monument. Anybody been there before? It is something to see. It is otherworldly. I thought I had known dry and desolate in West Texas, but I didn't know anything. It was beautiful, so long as you don't stay too long and bring lots of water, which we didn't. The place has 275 square miles of nothing. Nothing but hot, white sand. We stopped at the visitor center. We took a quick tour, but of course, Papa wanted to go farther. He's a tough guy at heart. Sometimes he wanted to prove it. Thank God I prevailed, suggesting just a small hike. Because there were signs, there are today, warning that there's no water available beyond the visitor center. And it's easy to forget how unforgiving the place could be. People have died there just walking around, even recently. Right then, I wanted to drive right into the Rio Grande and jump in and stay until we could go home. That's how hard it was and hot. Imagine for a moment, close your eyes and see the white sand and the hot and the dry tumbleweeds. It was parched. It was a wasteland. Jeremiah tells us, they will dwell in the parched places of the wilderness, in a salt land where no one lives. In that place, I could feel the dry, the sparseness. It felt dangerous somehow, desolate, full of emptiness somehow. There was like a hollow wind. It felt somehow long abandoned. You might not know, you might not even know that the landscape of your life is dangerous until it's too late to turn back and you're out of water, being scorched. Thankfully, Jeremiah has words of hope for us. The images of dry tumbleweed and the tree planted by water illuminate two simple but diametrically opposed orientations of life. Jeremiah says, "Cursed are those who trust in mere mortals and make mere flesh their strength. They shall be like a shrub in the desert and shall not see when relief comes. They shall live in the parched places of wilderness, in an uninhabited salt land." In other words, we can put our trust in our own power, or we can trust and hope in Jesus. Blessed are those who trust in the Lord. They shall be like a tree planted by water, sending out its roots by the stream. It shall not fear when heat comes, and its leaves shall stay green. In the year of drought, it is not anxious, and it does not cease to bear fruit. You see, we have a choice between different ways of living. We can turn our hearts away from the Lord, or we can trust in the Lord. We can choose to be the tree planted by a river in that dry and desolate place of white sand. All I wanted was to escape the desolation. As I said, I wanted to drive right to the Rio Grande and jump in and stay until we could go home. You see, Jesus is the river of life, and what a grand river he is. When we choose to put our trust in the Lord, when we choose to become Christ's disciples, we leave the desert behind. In the year of drought, we, the disciples, are not anxious. So how do we live into that discipleship? Well, with open hearts and with discipline. This is our vision because it's Jesus' vision. The same vision holds for Christ's church. We are about making more and better disciples, more and better. And this is what it looks like, and you've heard it time and time again. It looks like this. And it's easy. Prayer, study, worship, service, giving, fellowship, rest. It's easy. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Constant prayer, daily Bible, weekly worship, service to the community, especially for the poor, sacrificial giving, and rest. That one sounds easy, but it takes intention. It's easy. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 things. And before you know it, you're doing evangelism without even knowing. It's more and better. Evangelism and discipleship. These are the things that we do to be rich in spirit. These things fill us and fill us up. They are like cool rain in the desert, like sending roots into the stream. Amen.